Hi y'all, First Class 1972 signing in. Today we're going to work on a 1.8 liter cylinder head from a 2014 Chevy Cruze. Let's get started. Alright, so as I was using the air blowgun, I noticed that the air wasn't strong enough. So I asked my friend if they had turned off the air compressor lever, and he said everything is off right now. So I'll be right back, y'all. So initially, I got into cars at the age of 19, but as far as engine rebuilding, I got more into it at the age of 20, where most of my days were spent watching engine videos, especially from the show Engine Power on YouTube, but more specifically, Ford, Chevy, and Mopar rebuilds. I can honestly say I fell in love with the teardowns and rebuilds of engines. The engine parts like the crankshaft, hydraulic lifters, timing chain, push rods, checking the compression ratio, installing the piston rings and pistons. You guys get the idea. Not to mention the next exciting part of dropping in this bad boy into your favorite car or truck. It all seems so complicated, but I love the challenge. I was never really those students that aced all the math classes you take in school, but this engine stuff really gripped me. Funny part is, I actually went to school for film, which I still am pursuing, but I guess you could say I got sidetracked a bit with this car stuff. I actually haven't completed an engine rebuild. I mean, I got some hands-on experience by this point, but that's the plan, guys. My goal in coming to the shop is to get mentored by the guys as much as I can. But just like everything good in life, it takes time. I'll be honest, it's kind of weird telling you guys this, but I guess it'll give you guys an insight of where I'm coming from. Actually, you guys want to know when I felt like I was in the right place? It was when one of my mentors was teaching me hands-on on how to check for the compression ratio on this V8. My first time was when the engine was inside the car and he walked me to the steps. But my second time around was when the engine was out of the car. So I got more in-depth explanation since the valve covers were off on this Ford block. I just got this adrenaline rush that was unexplainable. Yeah. So here, I was pretty much learning how to set up the dial indicator gauge and making sure that it was calibrated to 0. This tool is actually going to help us check the valve lash. I went ahead and changed out the adapter since this one won't fit and or sit flush inside the cylinder head. Also, I needed to make sure that this pin was low enough to be able to check the valve, but not too low where it's sticking out of the adapter. This is so that it can sit flush against where the valve springs sit. I also noticed there was another screw on the back of the adapter, and I tightened it down just to see if it wasn't loose. Then I checked the pin and I noticed it was a bit loose like you can see here, but my friend confirmed that it was fine, just as long as the screws were snug. Alright, so this is a setup to check the dial indicator calibration tool, and from there, I moved over to the head. When I was checking the first valve, I noticed that the gauge kept moving around, and it wasn't giving me a solid reading. So I thought maybe it's because it went out of calibration. So I went back to the dial indicator calibration tool to confirm this. Alright, so as I'm measuring the valves, one of the guys comes over and asks me, how much are you going to grind off the valve? And I point at the specs, which is 1 inch and 440 thousandths of an inch. That's when he asked, what was the reading on that valve that you just checked? And I told him that I got 40. Then he says, go ahead and check it. Then when I check the reading this time, I say, well, now it's giving a different reading. Then he says, so the tool went out of calibration. So you gotta check it again with the dial indicator calibration tool. So that's when I go and check it. And my friend asks to confirm if I'm working on the exhaust side. And I say yes. So as I'm adjusting the tool, my friend tells me that right there where you're adjusting the calibration, it's not a leveled surface. So then he goes over and demonstrates how it's done. But as he's showing me on the place where he's leveling the gauge, he admits that this spot is actually not leveled. So honestly, I just started laughing because I'm like, really? Like, oh god. So then he tells me to grab it only from the blue adapter because if I grab it from the gauge, it'll lose its calibration. So let's see if the reading is within spec. It wasn't. It was actually a bit over 40. But that's fine since we could grind off material to meet the 40. So then I go ahead and proceed to check the rest of the valves. So then when I checked the next one, it was below the spec. Then we skipped ahead and checked the intake side, since the valves on the exhaust side were reading a bit lower than 40. Okay, for the intake side, the first one read 25, but the minimum is 1 inch, 430 thousandths of an inch, to which I tell him this. To which he says, "Here, let me see." And I pretty much find it funny because I get the feeling he doesn't trust the readings that I'm getting. Then as he checks them, he notices that the valves are off spec, to which he goes and checks to see if the gauge is actually lining up to 0, just to confirm that the numbers he is seeing are correct. Then one of the other guys comes over and lets me know that to make sure to keep the specs within 430 and 440. Then he asks me if I know how to check to see how many inches do the valves measure, to which I say no. Then he goes ahead and tells me, so what you do first so that you can find out what you're looking at, if it's 1 inch or 2 inches plus the 430 thousandths of an inch, you can use this tool and then you'll know what you are reading. So do you remember what I told you about this tool? It's not accurate, but at least you have an idea. To which I say, yeah. Then he says, so roughly you're looking at about 460 on this one. So I say, oh, okay. So then my friend says, so how are you gonna know if it's 2 inches and 40 or 160 or whatever? So when you put this one, you wanna know if it's 2 inches, 140 or 130 or whatever, until you find out if it's 1 or 2 inches. And then from there, you're gonna read, okay, so 1 full turn is 100 thousandths, so 1 to 100. So this one is 40, so it should be okay. So if they're within 30 and 40, they should be fine. Then you don't need to cut off any. And I pretty much say, got it. So then he says, so for now, just check them. If it's within spec, then we'll go into the next step, which is to assemble it and put the seals and everything else. Alright guys, so since the specs are 1 inch 430 thousandths of an inch through 1 inch 440 thousandths of an inch, so when you're measuring this out and you're using this one tool right here, you're only going to measure this part. So instead of these numbers, you could just cover them up. So you're only going to look at 40. Oh yeah, I remember this part. So here I was telling my friend to sing Without Shame because he was actually singing a song from Bad Bunny. Yeah, I don't know why, but yeah. I keep using this tool to get it back to 0, because when you touch the gauge, just like I did right now, it moves around. So I needed to keep going back and forth to get it back to 0. So yeah. Alright, so we're back in business.
Sonato Versace, non le chiamate loro 24 che...
Here, I was getting a bit annoyed because it kept moving without giving me a reading. So the exhaust side mostly reads 30. There was some 25s, but alright, let's get back into it. So that is how you calibrate the cylinder head. So right now, we're going to get this assembled. So what I'm gonna do is start cleaning everything and yeah, put the camshafts and we're gonna put in the springs and everything. I noticed these holes next to where the exhaust valves go. They look like bypass ports where the exhaust gases are released during the combustion chamber. But hey, who knows, right? After finishing blowing compressed air to get this cylinder head thoroughly cleaned, my friend comes up and tells me that this particular cylinder head will be difficult to assemble. So we got a challenge on us, y'all. We actually pre-lube the valve seal so that when we slip it into the valve stem, it will slide in smoothly and not damage the seal. Because if that rubber seal rips, then the seals are pretty much useless. Alright, so here I push them down with my finger and now I'm just making sure they're good to go before I hammer them in. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys got that, but yeah, so what I did first, I pressed in the valve seals. But I'm going to use this socket which fits outside the valve seal. So as long as it touches the outside, it won't damage the seal. I remember my friend told me that there are seals that can fit a bit too tight on the valve stem, which will cause the seals to come up, but that's normal. One of the guys comes and tells me that you will feel the difference in sound when you hammer in the seal, and I say, yeah, it sounds like you're hitting metal, which is an indication that it's properly seated. So like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the valve seats come up when they're a bit too tight. It's fine because either way when you put the springs on, they're going to return back to the bottom of the valve. Here I'm just making sure that the seals are properly seated. Actually, this one did come up a little. So here, it was time to grease the valves. But I wasn't too sure on this, so I asked my friend to get the confirmation. And once I did, I went ahead and greased them, but I actually did it off camera. Alright, so It's probably... Wait, I can't see. I had to get up close to get a better view. So this spring reads 38. Alright, so we know. Let me just take you with me. My friend comes over and asks me, do you remember about the seals? You put a little bit of oil and put it in, right? And I said, yeah. Then I told my friend I was going to check the height on the valve springs because they read 38 to 40. Because I was going to go double check the height right now on the computer to see if that's the height that it takes. So then he asked, that's the pounds? Or you check the height with the... To which I respond, the height. To which he says, oh, you check the pressure. And I said, oh, yeah, the pressure. So then he says, yeah, the pressure. Now check the height to see if there's any difference on the height. And I said, got it. So then he says, so we need to find out to see if there's one intake and one exhaust. And by this, he means that if the intake and exhaust valve springs were different in height and in pressure, or if they both take the same measurements. So this confirms that the intake and exhaust valve springs are the same, so we don't need to worry about mixing them up. Using the digital caliper, the springs measure within spec. Remember, this is just an estimate, not the actual reading. Here, Martin and I were talking about how classic cars are really nice, and that the 2013 F-150 is a good looking truck as well. It's because it was still here at the shop, but it was parked right outside. Alright y'all, thank y'all for watching, and remember, it's not your job to make people understand what your purpose is. First Class 1972, signing out.